I'll bet you many of you have seen this little jig, pictures of it, or maybe somebody's even tried to make one. This is a jig for sharpening jointer blades. These jointer blades are always made out of hardened steel, and they are extremely hard to sharpen. And when you're using a little sharpening stone like this, or maybe even a diamond stone, you are going to take forever to do this. Plus, you'll notice that even though I was very accurate as I could be on my table saw, and when I got these in, you'll notice at the end of the sharpening, I can still rock this. They are still not absolutely perfect in their alignment. The other problem that this angle here on jointer blades is 25 degrees, but what is it when you get it into the jig? What's this angle here that's going to sit in that? Because when you're sharpening this wants to be absolutely flat along here. If it's not, if it's at an angle like that, for example, now you have to grind down by hand that whole shoulder so that it's all even, so that you're actually changing the angle of the blade, which isn't a huge problem, except that you're grinding so much steel down for nothing. So would I ever recommend this? Unless you have some special reason of doing this, this is a very, very tedious job. Even with diamond stones, you will take forever doing that. It's not a procedure I would ever recommend. Oh, and by the way, your sharpening stone needs to remain absolutely flat, so you still need to get diamond stones anyway, because you're going to have to keep this flat, otherwise you start grinding grooves into your stone. Many years ago, I needed to drill a small hole into the end of a piece of wood, very similar to this. And I'm not stupid. I knew that this big drill bit wouldn't go in there easily, so I would be smart and drill a pilot hole. But what I wasn't smart about was looking at the grain of the wood. And the grain of the wood had an angle to it like that. And so I got a much smaller bit and would drill a pilot hole into it, and partway into that drill, into that hole, of course that wood gave way, and I ended up driving the tip of the bit into my thumb, which didn't do a lot of damage. It bled a bit, but I got over it. But I realized that I really need to take more time and set these things up properly and stop using my hands as a vise. Here's one of the worst ideas you can do. I've just put glue on both sides of these two boards, and I'm going to squeeze them together, and you'll notice that the glue will squeeze up. And I'm not going to put clamps on, but if I did, you would see the glue squeezing up just like that. Conventional wisdom says to spread a bunch of wood chips on there after you've clamped them together and get rid of the glue like that. This is the worst idea in the world, and the reason is because all you've done is spread glue all over here, and you can actually even see it. If you look closely, you can see there's a dark color, so that if you're going to stain or dye this wood, all this area where the glue is in is going to prevent the stain or dye from penetrating the wood, so you're actually going to get light spots if you're using a darker stain, for example. So never ever try and get rid of glue by rubbing sawdust on it. You may find yourself in a situation where you're doing stop dados. So you might have a dado blade in and you need to stop it and start it at a certain place. A bad idea is to draw a line on your throat plate. There's the stop, there's the start. The problem with doing this is after you push a few boards through, maybe it's even only one board, you can obliterate those lines altogether, which means the next board that you might want to be putting through, you might begin to cut it, and then all of a sudden you realize that the end of it is gone, it's disappeared. A far better way of doing that is to use masking tape wherever it is on your table saw. Put a line down, and you can actually use a square to get a nice straight line on that, and that would be your start and your stop on the other side. So don't write on your plate. It's not reliable because the wood is going to erase those lines. Being a woodworker means you also need to do a little bit of work with metal from time to time. And a hacksaw for many of us is one of the go-to tools whenever we're cutting steel rod or iron pipe or that sort of thing. One of the problems with cutting steel is understanding the direction that the teeth need to go. Now, in a hacksaw, the direction of the teeth need to go towards the front of the saw. So they need to be in this direction. And if you look carefully at a hacksaw, you will notice that there is actually a direction of the teeth. But there's an even easier way to do that. And that is to take any blade that you've got, and if you run your finger carefully one way, you'll notice that the teeth are tending to want to grab your finger, whereas when you push it the other way, it slides quite easily. Whether the blade is new or used, the teeth will sort of tend to want to grab in one direction and run very smoothly in the other. And the direction that they want to grab, that's the direction that the teeth want to be in. So this one is actually set correctly, because when I do this, it wants to grab my finger, but when I run it this way, it runs smoothly. And a hacksaw cuts on the forward stroke, on the down stroke. So when you push like that, that's where it's going to be cutting into the metal. When you're drawing back like that, that is just to reset. So if you're having trouble cutting things, the best thing is to check your blade, make sure your teeth are facing the front of the saw, and you will get much better cutting, and probably your blades will last longer when you do that as well, because when you're trying to cut in reverse, it just wears the teeth down, it makes them dull, and it takes much longer to cut through things. So check the orientation of your hacksaw blade teeth. Here's a bad idea I see from time to time. People pushing wood through the table saw with a long vertical board like this and pushing it through when it's vertical. The problem with this, first of all, you can move the wood back and forth like this, which is unstable. The other problem is the wood can move back and forth like this. Even though you think you've got it nice and vertical, it may not be. And what happens when you get partway in here, this blade has a very strong tendency to want to kick back, and it will surprise you when it does that, because it happens very suddenly and it will kick back at you. You'll probably lose grip of it. The same thing can happen with wider boards when you're pushing those through. Again, you've got this sort of situation going on, and it may not be as flat as you would like it on the bottom. The best way to do this, if you have to do it this way, is to use a backer board, and that makes it much safer. You can hold that wood. This is vertical, absolutely 90 degrees here. So you can hold that vertical. So that wood now is going to be ushered through like that. And you can push that through, and that will be a much safer way of doing it. Even with a wider board, same thing, a backer board. Now you still have this issue going on where you're going to have to keep it absolutely even to the fence. And I don't love either one of these situations. The best way to do that is to take a moment and make yourself a jig for vertical cutting, and set that up like that. You notice it's already got a backer board here. That's what that backer board is for. And you can shove wood through the saw safely and easily and accurately. Yeah, I just don't like this jig at all. I would never use a jig like this. There's better ways of doing that. But you know what? There are jigs that I've made, tons of them, that work really well. And one of them was the jig that I showed you on the table saw for making the vertical cuts. That video will show up here. If you haven't seen that video, it's a really easy jig to make, and you know what, you can store it in your back room or the back of your shop, and when you need it, it'll be there ready to use. You won't have to stop everything and make it. I use that jig quite frequently. You'd be surprised how often I get to use that jig, so it might be something you want to have a look at. I'm Colin Canet for Woodwork Web. Thanks for watching today.